It's fantastic to see so many people here and online for such a celebratory event. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I would like to welcome you all to this very special edition of the ISTEP Speaker Series. ISTEP, for anyone who is new to that acronym, is the Institute for Studies in Transdisciplinary Engineering, Education, and Practice. ISTEP is also a convivial meeting place for innovative engineering instruction and research that transcends traditional institutional boundaries. Specifically, ISTEP aims to broaden engineering education to emphasize human relationality, perspectives, and values. Our speaker series spotlights scholars from the field of engineering education in order to showcase ISTEP's areas of focus, and those are leadership, communication, socio-technical thinking, business and entrepreneurship, and learning for life. This series, including today's celebratory lunch and today's equally celebratory Zoom link, is made possible by the incredible ISTEP team. So that includes the leadership team, but especially today, we'd like to thank Shauna Greenberg, Mason Subotich, Robert Wynn, Joanne and Paula were out at the registration table. Norris was helping out today, but especially and always Estelle Oliva Fisher for all the amazing work to bring us together today. I am thrilled to introduce Professor Robert Irish. 30 years ago, Rob founded the Engineering Communication Program, or ECP, right here at the University of Toronto. He directed the program from its beginning in 1995 to 2008. He's the author of two outstanding communication textbooks, Engineering Communication from Principles to Practice, co-authored with Peter Weiss and published by Oxford in 2013, and Writing in Engineering, A Brief Guide, published by Oxford in 2016. Rob has written on topics spanning from assignment design to teaching team development, from examining positionality to embedding ethics and ethical thinking in the classroom. Rob's recent work focuses on how students learn and structure argument, as well as care ethics in engineering education. Rob's energetic, student-centered curiosity and voracious intellectual range exemplifies the best that transdisciplinary thinking can be, which is a fearless and generative invitation to reach across disciplinary boundaries. Today, Rob will deliver a reflection called Communication as an Incremental Revolution, 30 Years of ECP. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you so much, Fiona. That was very generous. And thank you for being here today, for joining us in this celebration. It's kind of a great chance to celebrate 30 years of work by a lot of people, because you don't build a program like the Engineering Communication Program that is so wide-reaching and robust without a very strong team. And when we say that team begins to incorporate our students, it becomes a team that is literally a team of thousands. And so I am grateful for all those people over the years who have contributed in various ways to this project of engineering communication. Before I go any further, perhaps a word about the title of this talk. I recognize that an incremental revolution is, of course, a paradox. Can one have a gradual, progressive, forcible overthrow of the social order? I love to think so. Now, everyone knows that a well-structured talk has 3 points which lead ineluctably to a strong takeaway outcome. And so, of course, today I have 6 points in a kind of double plus good 2-for-1 that is going to end in the old guy musing. But I'll try and keep them short and quick, or at least entertaining along the way. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about spaghetti on the wall, juggling, laying foundations, integration, aspiration, and then young men dream dreams and old men see visions, or the other way around. Young men see visions, old men dream dreams. I'll give you the old man's dream by way of conclusion. But first, I think a little bit about how we got here, even from the beginning, and recognizing that this is my selective reconstruction of the past from the fault of memory that is human rather than computer. So it began really with this word. At least in my memory, this is the reason that I got the job in engineering communication. Because, you see, this word is a Jewish word. I am not Jewish. So in using it in my cover letter for the job, I was doing an act of cultural appropriation. And, you know, chutzpah means audacity, it means boldness, it can mean insolence, but usually it is rendered in the positive. And so when I walked into the interview, there was a moment of honesty in advertising, and the question was, did I display chutzpah? Well, apparently I did. I got the job. What was the job? The job was for language across the curriculum. And it was a 6-month experiment to see if we could embed language into the engineering curriculum. And I thought, 6 months? You can do anything for 6 months. Here we are. So, and with that, the work began. And the remit for language across the curriculum was to bring communication into engineering courses without adding new classes. Or as I'm calling it, spaghetti against the wall. Oh, I don't know who that young guy is, but that's from the 2000 annual report for engineering. Spaghetti against the wall, let's go there. So what happened was, starting in January 1996, we began to work with 5 courses. I was able to hire 5 TAs, 3 of whom are here today. So good to see you folks. I was able to hire 3 TAs, and then we started a writing center, began to do guest lectures in classes, began to do writing workshops within tutorials and courses, presentation coaching for students. In-lab writing support came along pretty quickly after that, and always training TAs to do grading. And that led very quickly to a series of lunch and learn workshops for faculty. And that perhaps was one of the most important pieces in developing the program in the early stages, because we did things like designing writing assignments and how do we do that? And we learned together. And this was one of the great collaborations that happened within engineering with some willing faculty, and we built the program together. I think one of my favorite courses to work with was a 2nd-year materials engineering lab course. And every week I would meet with 1/3 of the students in writing their lab reports, while the other 2/3 of the students were in lab sessions. And the goal was that each of the labs that the students would write would become a reference lab, because the labs were about learning to use equipment like scanning electron microscopes and that kind of thing. And so by the end of the term, the students had a set of labs which were about how to use the various equipment, how to interpret the results. And one of the significant things that the professor noted was that this group of students understood all of that better. And this leads me to a commonplace bit of wisdom: writing deepens thinking. And the danger, of course, of that was not that suddenly students loved writing, they didn't, but that they understood that it was a necessary skill, and they began to see it as something that was inevitable. And that, of course, led to success. And so by 1999, we were working with 72 courses. And I was teaching in workshops and all these places more hours than really humanly possible. It was kind of the equivalent of about teaching 8 courses without having a course of my own. And so it was a juggling act. And the other thing that happened in 1999 was something that Michael Charles, who was then the dean, and he's the dean whose vision this whole thing was, he scored a coup because he took a set of courses that was being taught for our second language engineering students, and he brought them in-house. And so suddenly, our mandate started to change because suddenly courses became part of it. And we had this set of courses which had just been language hurdles for our second language students. And we took those courses and recast them and reshaped them into being an introduction into engineering and into engineering communication. And so suddenly our second language learners were ahead of our English only students because they had this rich introduction, whereas the English only students were being taught a course affectionately called defective technical writing by the English department. And I know that course because I taught it for 3 years. So the course was structurally positioned to be ineffective at best. And Michael Charles took those second language courses and brought them in from outside, brought them into engineering, and with it came the finances. And so that was a very important piece of the process, particularly because those of you who are old enough will remember that there was this guy named Mike Harris, who was the premier of the province of Ontario and didn't like education. And so he was looking for ways, we were budget cutting. And I know, because I have had moles on the inside of the highest decision-making, I know that language across the curriculum was on the chopping block under discussion, certain departmental chairs eyeing covetously the few dollars that went our way. Fortunately, Michael Charles was a strong supporter for the program, and I think that, okay, so that's in there. Yeah, we've got that one. Next. Revolutionary Handbook. Item number 1 is that change needs a champion. But a champion needs a team. And so what happened then, by bringing this money and resource into the program, as well as the new responsibility, we were able to hire. And this is when Catherine Tita and Peter Weiss joined the team in language across the curriculum. Now, most of you will know Peter. He became a stalwart of the program. He was a great contributor, builder of the program, and eventually took over for me as the director. Catherine didn't stay with the program very long, but I will say that her fingerprints are still all over the program because she was the pioneer of the idea of integrating second language learning into the core curriculum, which is what we still do in our courses now. So that integration is still with us even now. Short digression, a really underrated business book as Patricia Pitcher's Artists, Craftsmen, and Technocrats. And in that book, I explain why this digression will become apparent in a second. But she says artists come in and they are filled with ideas, many of them crazy, many of them will never work, but they are throwing the ideas out into the ether all the time. But for an organization to be successful, the artist brings alongside the craftsman, the craftsperson, we might say in the 21st century, brings alongside the craftsperson. And the craftsperson takes some of those crazy ideas, brings them under control, and begins to say, now we've got something meaningful, and there's a care for the what we're doing. And I often feel like Peter, whether he wanted to or not, was the craftsperson to my artist. I was throwing the ideas out, and Peter was grabbing things and combining them with his own much saner ideas. And together we were building a program that began to take shape as something where we were concerned not just with new ideas, but with the quality of the work as we proceeded. Now, I won't go on. So the classic example of that is in Apple, Steve Jobs brought in Johnny Ives, right? So all the beautiful design of your Mac computer is Johnny Ives. The crazy ideas above it are Steve Jobs. I won't go on to suggest that Alan and Deb are technocrats, because that would be completely unfair. And besides, if the technocrat takes over, according to Pitcher, the organization starts to go into decline. And we are certainly not seeing that. So whether they are continuing artists in their own right or are craftspeople, I'm not so sure. But certainly they have contributed in great ways. So anyway, that takes us to the next phase, which is the laying of foundations. And so the next year, so we're into about 2000 here. My memory on these exact dates is a little fuzzy. Engineering science came to the engineering communication board. We were still language across the curriculum, came to language across the curriculum and said, we need you to teach a course in communication for our students. And in preparing that course, I created a set of course notes because nothing would serve quite as the textbook for what we were trying to do. And so I created this set of course notes, and then Peter joined me and we collaborated together, and eventually we built a textbook of which I think we're justifiably still quite proud. Those courses established the pedagogy of ECP going forward. A grounding in rhetoric and argument, an appreciation for language, a respect for the discipline of engineering. All of these things fed into what we did to create a very Toronto approach. And so it was very appropriate that the Humber River pedestrian bridge was on the cover of the first edition. The second edition went on to have some, I don't know, some boring thing from Berlin. But the idea was that we were establishing an approach based in principles that guided the communication that we were teaching. So it was very contextual. It was very much here, which probably is a reason why the books have had some uptake, but we haven't been big hits in the, Stewart calculus kind of way of things. However, I wanted just to prove to you that I can do the 3 points. So I thought I would tell you the textbook's 3 points, or tell you the textbook in 3 points. So the first one is that everything is argument. It's always all about reasoning. Now, sometimes my engineering colleagues will say, well, the report needs to tell a story. And I always have just nodded and said, yes, yes. But what the report really needs to do is it needs to have a clear through line of a reasoned argument. And when it does that, then the report can sing. So the second thing from the book is that form follows function. Students who studied praxis with me over the years will know this as a kind of a mantra. You can check all the boxes on the template, you can follow all the instructions right down to the last letter, but if it doesn't meet your purpose, the report is going to fail. The presentation is going to fail. The meeting is going to fail, because form has to follow function. The purpose is going to drive everything. So don't get stuck in the report you're asked to write. Think about what your purpose is. And the last one is that writing is design. I think one of the hallmarks of the engineering communication program has been that we have translated the work of writing into the language of engineering, and we understand that the act of writing is an act of design. It is a shaping of meaning that is every bit as much design work as the building of the prototype. So there's the textbook in 3 points. So now you only have to read it if you want to go to sleep at night. And that then leads us to the fourth, I think I'm up to fourth phase, and that is the phase of integration. And once we started on this approach, skipped over a few pages of my notes here, we started developing new courses. The first one was actually an upper year design and communication course in electrical and computer engineering. I was asked to join the curriculum reform committee in the early 2000s in electrical and computer engineering, and we created a hardware design and communication and a software design and communication course. And this sequence of courses kind of set the standard for what it was to do this sort of collaborative team teaching, a design person, a communication person working in partnership in these courses. And big courses, 250 students, so big courses, but working with students in smaller units and small teams and reshaping the course structure and the tutorial structure to create those small groups that we had learned were so effective in the course we were doing for engineering science. But this was that first piece of integration. Now, after a few years, the electrical and computer engineering department decided that 2 courses in the second year was too many to give over to design, so they dropped the hardware course and they kept the software course. It got revamped, and it's still running as a very successful course. But I will just say I'm feeling a little vindicated, because about 5 years ago, they reinstated a hardware course. It's like, yeah, I told you. But good for them. They saw it, they developed it, and now students actually have the option of the hardware or the software, and they go forward. Then in quick succession, 2 new first-year courses came on the books. One was the Engineering Strategies and Practice course, which was taken by all of the students in the Core 8 engineering programs, and the other was Praxis for the engineering science students. Now, these courses represented a major ground shift for engineering education. A revolution, if you will. Because it's really an interesting thing that happened. These courses were very controversial when they first came in. In some corners, they still are. But the interesting thing was, the thing that was controversial was, can you teach design to first-year students who don't know any math and physics? It wasn't, can you teach communication to first-year students? That was a given. That was like, oh yes, of course they need communication. It was, yeah, but can they do design? But the great reframing that happened was, design thinking became the lens through which students saw math and physics, instead of math and physics being the lens through which students saw design. That's a revolution. And communication was the thin end of the wedge that let that happen. Because there's an interesting power shift. design was the thing that people were resistant to, communication was suddenly the thing that everybody saw as the obvious move. I'm not sure it always stayed that way. Design now has its feet under it and is well established. But this idea of foundation design was transformative, and it was the place in which we saw this lovely, neat fitting together. In praxis, we have a model which we use for the engineering design process. We call it FDCR. Frame the opportunity. Then you diverge and generate ideas about how you might address that opportunity. Then you converge and make some decisions about which one of these is more workable, and you probably do some testing and some research and thinking through to get there. And then you go around again and you reframe and you re-diverge, and you do that until you reach some kind of point where you have something that you can work with. But notice, in the middle of it all is communication. The idea that you represent what you do, and sometimes that's physical representation, sometimes that's drawing, almost all the time that's an argument being structured and delivered either orally or in writing in some way or another. Now, integration looked different in different places. In our mechanical and industrial engineering program, integration kind of still looks like that earlier juggling where we did little modules in lots of different places, and the instruction is kind of built through the years. In civil engineering, we have partnered courses where a communication course partners with a technical course, which provides basically the assignments for the communication course, but it stands alone. In ECE, as noted, we've got those upper year design and communication pairings that work together. In chemical engineering and materials engineering, we're kind of going through a transition phase, and these things happen. And so I think that we'll see where they land. So it's a little harder to speak to that. And that's partly because integration is not easy. Integration requires mutual respect. Integration requires ongoing negotiation and a true collaborative spirit. So recently, I was on a cycling trip in Europe, and it was my wife and I, we were just cycling together. And one night we were having dinner in a restaurant, and the table next to us was a group of, I'm sorry, stereotypically loud Americans who were also clearly on a group bike trip. And one of them commented, it's always good to know who the jerk in the group is, because if you don't see them, it's probably you. And I thought, there's a great deal of wisdom in that for team teaching as well. If you don't see the jerk in the room when you're a team teacher, it's probably you. So to those of you with whom I have team taught, I'm sorry. There have been, I'm sure, many times when my self-awareness was lacking and I was the jerk in the room. But the power of team teaching is that when it is working right, students experience that iron sharpens iron impact that shapes their learning experience. The fact that there are 2 or 3 or 4 heads in the room shaping that learning experience means it's always going to be richer, better, more full than one brain putting together a course. In praxis, which I taught for 15, 16 years, I've lost count. In praxis, we had this approach, which was that we had a kind of agreement between us as instructors that we could interrupt each other, we could disagree with each other, we could clarify something. And it was interesting because what the public disagreement did was it modeled for the students trusting teamwork. Right? I can be standing at the front of the room and my colleague can stand up and disagree and say, wait a minute, there's a trust in the team. And when we stand up to clarify something, that models to the students that we care. We want to be sure that the ideas don't get lost, that they get clarified in a way that is approachable to the student. So this model of integrated team teaching is powerful. Now, it is costly, and I don't mean money, but I'm sure it is there too. What I mean is it takes a great deal of energy. It takes a great spirit of collaboration to make it work. This model, fundamentally developed by my colleague Jason Foster, is one that we worked over years to live out and to work out. So perhaps not just writing is design, but ultimately everything is design. And now this takes me to Revolutionary Handbook lesson number 2. Everything is design, and of course I've already made the case that everything is argument, and the ergo design is argument. Now, I can, just in case, my engineering colleagues want to get their knickers in a bit of a twist and say, yeah, but what about? What about CAD? What about testing? What about modeling, et cetera, et cetera? I'll say, yeah, we accept those as modes of communication as well. And they're really helpful in building an argument too. So yes, my point is that design thinking and communication sit very neatly together. It's been no surprise that these two disciplines working together have reshaped engineering education at the University of Toronto over the last 20 years. Let me say that the logic here is actually pretty simple. You look at the graduate attributes, these 12 attributes that we've got from the CEAB. Even if I give away 3 of them, including the use of engineering tools, which I am loath to give away because those tools are used for design, 9 of them are about communication. One of them says it's communication, but the others are all about communication as well. And so I think that it makes sense that we see that U of T has been reshaped by this, and we've not been afraid to dream big. We may not have been revolutionaries rioting in the streets, but that dream that was initially caught by a few has become a powerful force strengthening U of T engineering in the world. And of course, words matter. I remember years ago, engineers would have these 4 letters emblazoned on the shoulder of their leather jackets. And I said, engineers require technical writing? And they told me, no, engineers rule the world. And that is a kind of engineering arrogance, a sense of engineering superiority. So I think something really powerful happened when, starting in engineering science, it changed. I believe it was Will Cluett, as the chair of EngSci, who initiated this, but I can't swear to it. And it became Engineers for the World. And suddenly the field opens up in the sense that it's about others. And I think communication has played its part in this. Communication teaches not only the functional managing of documents or making of presentations, it also teaches listening. It teaches attention to the needs of a stakeholder. It teaches empathy in that process. Communication calls on social responsibility and invites deeper thinking. It shapes who we are
as engineering at U of T. And this leads me to the fifth and final phase, and that is the aspiration. What do I mean by that? For the first 13 years as the director of ECP, I taught mandatory communication, either in courses or mandatory communication courses. Throughout that period, it was very rich, very full, very, very meaningful, but it was largely thankless. Students don't necessarily recognize that getting to base level competence in a skill set is rewarding. We worked hard to make sure as few as possible fell through the cracks. And so I think that is important work, and I think it's important that ECP continue to do that work. And I missed something here because somewhere in here, we changed to ECP. We changed from, in 2004, we changed from language across the curriculum to the engineering communication program. And part of that was because we were no longer across things like some kind of surface piece. We were in the engineering curriculum. And so it didn't make sense to have that kind of odd acronym, LAC, when really we were about enriching that educational experience. And so in my last year as the director of the program, I moved through the processes of governance, a set of elective courses that would allow students to not just gain functional base, but to aspire to do more, to be better. We created a communication certificate. So we created courses like Language and Power, the one that I still teach, Science and Engineering in the Media, Science on Stage, Engineering in the Arts, a set of courses on Engineering and Social Justice, a set of courses which for us as faculty allowed us to teach students who actually wanted to be in the room. That was a nice treat. But for our students, they created a place where they could go and they could dig deep into some of these ideas. They could write things that were meaningful. They could learn to present. They could learn to stand and make, develop their persona on stage. All of these important things. So those courses, I had no idea when we began the process of trying to work them through the governance procedures, how controversial they would be. And so it came to the faculty council meeting where the courses were up for approval, and there was a great deal of acrimony in the meeting. There was a lot of hostile take and hostile discussion, and I was ready to stand and fight. And a careful hand on my arm just told me to be quiet. Susan McCann, I don't know if you're watching online. I know you're not here in the room. Thank you. I am reminded of Aristotle's advice that there's no point arguing with the unpersuadable. In the end, it passed easily. But I have remembered the very rhetorically effective comment of one of those hostile speakers. They said, the main thing is to know the main thing and to do the main thing, not the other thing. So, that was 2007, so almost 20 years on. I now have my response to that. You're absolutely right. It is important to know the main thing and do the main thing, not the other thing, and communication is the main thing. So I stand by communication as being the thing we should be doing here in engineering. Now, in the years since then, I stepped down from the lead of ECP. Peter and then Deb and then Alan took the role, each in their own turn, in their own ways, continuing to champion communication, deepen our connections in departments, refine our practices, provide students with spaces and opportunities to excel. Somewhere in there, ECP joined forces with iLead, and we created the department with the most unwieldy name, which really needs a good acronym, hence ISTEP. And together things have moved forward, continued to develop. We've seen the team grow. And in many ways, the communication certificate that we sought and fought for back in 2007 has languished. It's done by a few students a year, nowhere near the number who do the leadership certificate. And so to my colleagues in iLead, let me just say this. You don't have leadership without communication. I mean, just think about this logically. You can be a communicator who's not in leadership. But you can't be in leadership without communicating. Or I suppose to correct that, you could be in leadership without communicating, but you won't be a leader without communicating. Communication is the foundation, which is why it's important that we are together. There's a paper that my students write in the Language and Power course, and I've done it every year since the first year, in which they explore an aspect of their worldview. And I have heard over and over again from students over the years that it is the most important paper they've ever written. It is the moment when they suddenly are encouraged, persuaded, forced to explore an aspect of themselves at a deeper level. And that leads me to Revolutionary Handbook lesson number 3, and that is that the person matters. Always. And so, education is always personal. It is always about my relationship with each student. This is a challenge at scale. I have taught classes of 200 and 300 students. Some of you teach larger. But it is too easy to deflect from that and say, oh no, my responsibility is to the content of the course. Our responsibility is always still to the person. It's still to the individual. Education is only transformative. It will only be revolutionary when we make it personal. And this leads me to my dream. Language across the curriculum was Dean Michael Charles's dream 30 years ago. He shared it with me, and more we caught the vision. Imagine engineering students from the University of Toronto who are not just technically brilliant, but who can communicate, who are strong communicators. Imagine. But we don't have to imagine, do we? Because we see it now every day, student after student. Because we have championed communication and understood our vision as integral to the work of engineering and been bold in executing, but always moving forward with inclusion and generosity and humility, focusing on the person before anything else. Communication has revolutionized engineering education. Now, in the process, we have actually been fortunate to win some prizes. In 2007, Peter and the team that created engineering strategies in practice, won the Alan Blizzard Award for collaborative teaching from the Society for Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. In 2019, I was awarded the Ron Blick Award by the IEEE's Professional Communications Society for innovation in technical communication instruction. In 2021, Lydia won the Margaret Proctor Award here at U of T for excellence in teaching writing. In 2025, ECP won the Oliver Goldsmith Award from the IEEE Professional Communications Society for excellence in teaching. So we never went seeking awards, at least I don't think so. We never went seeking awards. We went seeking excellence. We went seeking doing the best we can in a particular context, in a particular place, for a particular set of students. And I think it's just simply that when you do that, excellence shows. Now, to the old man's dream. More than ever in this age of AI, deepening understanding of communication is more and more important. When students can instantly gratify their curiosity with dubious insights of Claude or GPT, learning is lost. Achievement without struggle is empty. It is in the struggle that we learn who we are as humans. It is in the struggle that the reward becomes worth it. So I would argue, or cast a vision, if you will, that engineering more than ever needs to emphasize becoming human. To care genuinely, meaningfully. What we do with our students, what our students need to do with our world. To listen deeply, well. To speak the truth, whatever that means in a given context. And to walk in relationship, and this is something that I think we do with our students as we walk with them on their learning journey. And might I even say one more, not on the slide, love. Now, that may sound kind of flaky or whatever, but in my experience, love isn't easy. Love involves an ongoing daily commitment. Love entails looking to the other and saying, what is it that is best for you and is going to enable you to thrive? We need to be seeking that. And we need to be shaping our curriculum so that our students see that from us, learn that from us, and go and do likewise with their world. That's the way the revolution we've seen in engineering education becomes a revolution that shapes our society in ways that are deeper, more meaningful, richer, more full. And with that, thank you very much.